Hi there, Emily Midget here with you today for this month's installment of Exploring with Emily. I showed you how easy it was to watercolor with Distress Oxide inks on regular watercolor paper in my March Exploring with Emily video, but this month I wanted to further explore the opacity of the oxide inks by testing them out on a black surface. Using Daniel Smith watercolor grounds in Mars Black, I was able to create a panel of black watercolor paper suitable for watercoloring that also wouldn't warp or fall apart. Let's get started with the details. For today's project, I am using the new Essentials by Ellen Mondo Wildflower Bouquet stamp set, Daniel Smith Mars Black watercolor grounds, Hero Arts Unicorn White pigment ink, and many shades of the Distress Oxide Reinkers. I found that the lighter shades of the Oxide Reinkers work best on this dark background, but I think this technique would work well for almost all of the colors in the Oxide line. Daniel Smith watercolor grounds can be used to make many different surfaces into a suitable canvas for watercoloring. You basically paint them onto your surface. In this case, I used Arches cold press watercolor paper. Allow them to dry, and then you have a surface that will withstand your watercoloring technique. The label says that they can be used on a variety of surfaces, including canvas, paper, plaster, hardboard, and a variety of non-absorbent surfaces like glass, plastic, and metal. They come in a variety of colors, but I was so intrigued by the idea of using them with the Oxide Reinkers that I couldn't wait to test out the surface, the black, to create my black watercolor surface. After allowing my newly painted black watercolor paper to dry sufficiently, I stamped the gorgeous new Mondo Wildflower Bouquet in the corner of my A2 panel using Hero Arts Unicorn White pigment ink. This is my go-to for no-line coloring, and it worked perfectly for today's project. I viewed the technique with these opaque colors to be almost watercoloring backwards. Normally, I add the concentrated watercolor and pull the color out with my damp brush to create a smooth fade and allow the white of the watercolor paper to aid in creating depth on the image. But when watercoloring on a black background, I had to use 3 different shades to create the gradient. I began by adding wilted violet to the section of the petal that would have the deepest shadows, then blended that with picked raspberry, ending with spun sugar in that lightest sweet spot. I keep the color as intense as possible, diluting it with very little water, which allows the colors to remain vibrant and opaque. I do use a wet brush to move them around, but I try to keep the brush damp in order to maintain that intense color. The Distress line, both oxide and regular, are known for their water-reactive properties, so paying attention to the amount of water on your brush is an important element of this technique. Too much water and you'll dilute your color and opacity. Too little water and the color won't move at all. You'll notice that I move my brush off camera frequently. I'm usually dabbing the brush on a paper towel to help maintain the optimal level of dampness but not wetness. The opacity of the watercolors also requires a bit extra effort when cleaning your brush. They like to cling to the bristles of the brush a bit longer than traditional watercolors, but cleaning your brush with some fresh, clean water after your painting session leaves it as good as new. As with all no-line watercoloring, you have to keep the wet sections separate until they dry. Choose separate sections that do not touch, or you run the risk of the paint bleeding into each other, thus ruining the definition of your edges and creating a sodden mess. These opaque colors do take a bit of time to dry, so allow plenty of time between watercoloring each section. You can also use a heat tool to help speed up the drying process if you're in a hurry as well. One of my most important watercoloring tips is layers. Layers of color will help you achieve more depth and definition, and this rule still applies with this technique. After the initial layer had dried, I used the same technique to add a second layer of color, which helps to intensify the color itself on the black cardstock, while also helping to sharpen any edges that might have blurred in the watercoloring process. Contrast between the dark shadows and the light edges are what creates depth, so cleaning up those edges with the lighter colors and adding a bit more of the darker color to the shadowed sections help to enhance your contrast and create more depth. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's video and maybe picked up a few ideas on how you can stretch the supplies that you probably already have on hand. Using Distress Oxide Reinkers as watercolors is just one more way to get a bit more bang for your buck, and the gorgeous velvety texture that they create is just the icing on the cake. If you liked this video, please give us a thumbs up, and for more information about the products used, head over to the Hutson blog. Thanks so much for stopping by, and have a marvelous day.